Have you ever wondered why men chase after women who seem to need them the least, while completely ignoring those who shower them with attention? Over a century ago, Sigmund Freud discovered that our unconscious mind doesn't operate according to logic, but follows hidden drives and desires that we ourselves don't understand. Human desire works paradoxically. The more available something is, the less valuable it appears to our primitive mind. But behind this lies a deeper truth about the nature of attraction and the mechanisms of our psyche. Today you'll understand why strategic ignoring isn't just superficial manipulation, but an activation of ancient psychological principles. You'll discover how your subconscious sends and receives signals that determine the fate of your relationships, often without you noticing. If you're ready to understand and consciously apply the hidden laws of human attraction, then join us on this journey into the depths of the human soul. Picture yourself walking into a restaurant and seeing two tables, one completely empty and another with a small line forming around it. Instinctively, you'll assume the busy table serves better food. Your unconscious has just applied one of the most fundamental rules of human psychology: scarcity creates value. Sigmund Freud recognized that our mind doesn't function rationally, but according to primitive drives and unconscious patterns. One of these patterns is what he called libidinal investment, the psychic energy we invest in people and objects. Paradoxically, we invest more energy in what's hard to reach than in what's unconditionally available to us. When you're constantly available to a man, answering his messages immediately and fulfilling all his needs, you're signaling something fatal to his unconscious: I have no other value besides you. The primitive brain interprets this availability as lack of demand, and lack of demand means low value. Freud also discovered the principle of transference, how we unconsciously project past experiences onto current situations. Men often learned in childhood that they had to compete for their mother's attention. These early experiences shape their relationship behavior as adults. A woman who's hard to conquer activates these ancient hunting instincts and conquest fantasies. This doesn't mean you should be cold or cruel. It means you must understand your value doesn't lie in your availability, but in your uniqueness. When you learn to be strategically absent, you give his mind space to miss you, fantasize about you, and idealize you. Consider history's most successful seductresses: Cleopatra, Marilyn Monroe, Coco Chanel. None of them was famous for being constantly available. They all understood the art of measured attention. They gave enough to spark interest, but never so much that the tension disappeared. Freud's research showed that our unconscious thinks in symbols and metaphors. For the male mind, a hard-to-reach woman becomes a symbol of the unknown, the mysterious, the valuable. A constantly available woman, however, becomes a symbol of the known, the safe, the boring. Modern neuroscience confirms Freud's intuition. Our reward system responds more strongly to unpredictable rewards than to constant ones. When you dose your attention like a drug, rarely but intensely, you create a neurochemical dependency stronger than any constant devotion. But here's the crucial point. True ignoring doesn't arise from calculation, but from healthy self-worth. When you lead a fulfilling life, pursue your own interests, and possess emotional independence, your unavailability becomes authentic and magnetic. You're not manipulating, you're simply living a life valuable enough to be desirable. Freud made a revolutionary discovery. What we consciously want is often the opposite of what our unconscious desires. A man can tell you with the most sincere voice that he wants a woman who's always there for him, yet his unconscious will find exactly that woman uninteresting. Think of human desire like a muscle that never experiences resistance, atrophies. A desire that never has to overcome obstacles dies from its own fulfillment. Freud called this the reality principle, the psychic tendency where immediate need satisfaction leads to long-term displeasure. Think about your own experiences. How did you feel when you finally got what you desperately wanted? Wasn't there often a feeling of emptiness, of disappointment? That's because our unconscious doesn't love fulfillment, but the longing itself. When you're constantly available to a man, you rob him of the opportunity to miss you. Yet missing is one of the strongest emotional bonds that exist. Freud recognized that absence isn't simply the opposite of presence. It's an active psychic state that nourishes fantasies, longings, and projections. The principle works like a psychological vacuum. When you're physically or emotionally absent, his mind must fill this emptiness. And what does he fill it with? His own desires, hopes, and idealized notions of you. The less concrete information he has about you, the more space you give his unconscious to make you into the perfect woman he dreams of. Freud also discovered the concept of displacement, how psychic energy transfers from one object to another. When you're not immediately available, his attention shifts from superficial things to a more intense preoccupation with you. Suddenly, he's thinking about your words, interpreting your gestures, searching for hidden meanings in your behavior. Modern society has taught us that love means giving everything, sacrificing completely, always being there. But depth psychology shows us true attraction arises through the interplay between closeness and distance, between giving and withholding, between revelation and mystery. Consider nature. A flower that opens its blooms only at night is perceived as rarer and more desirable than one that constantly blooms. This isn't due to superficiality, but to a deeper psychological principle. Rare things are coded as valuable. But beware of the most common misunderstanding. Ignoring doesn't mean being mean or dismissive. It means leading such a fulfilling life that you're naturally not always available. It means having so many of your own interests, dreams, and goals that a man can only get a portion of your attention, and this portion becomes all the more valuable. Freud taught us that the unconscious thinks in opposites. Availability is unconsciously equated with worthlessness, while scarcity is associated with value. This primitive logic may seem unfair, but it's deeply rooted in our evolutionary psychology. The next time you feel the impulse to respond immediately, to be immediately available, to immediately fulfill all his wishes, remember, you're doing him no favor. You're robbing him of the sweet torment of longing, the exciting feeling of conquest, the deep satisfaction of missing someone, and you're robbing yourself of the possibility to occupy the place in his mind that only the rare and precious can occupy. Freud revolutionized our understanding of human psychology with a simple but shattering insight. We never see reality, but only our own unconscious desires and fears that we project onto other people. When you're absent, your mind becomes the canvas on which he paints his deepest longings. Imagine you leave a room and leave behind a half-open door. What happens in the fantasy of the one left behind? He won't see the empty door. He'll imagine what's happening behind it. That's exactly how your strategic silence works. It creates an empty space that his unconscious must fill with the most beautiful possibilities. Freud discovered that our mind cannot tolerate uncertainty. When he doesn't know what you're thinking, where you are, or what you're feeling, his unconscious will automatically fill the gaps, and with the most optimistic interpretations of his desires. You become the woman he dreams of, the perfect complement to his deepest needs. Think about your own experiences with people who seemed mysterious to you. Do you remember how your fantasy began to work? How you interpreted deeper meanings into their every gesture? How a simple smile became a sign of special affection? These are exactly the psychological mechanisms you activate when you learn to be properly absent. The fascinating thing about projections is that they always reveal more about the projector than about the object of projection. When you remain silent, he projects his longing for understanding into your silence. When you're absent, he projects his longing for an independent, mysterious woman into your absence. You become the mirror of his deepest desires. Freud also recognized the phenomenon of transference, how we unconsciously transfer feelings and experiences from the past onto current relationships. Many men experienced in childhood that they had to compete for their mother's attention. A hard-to-reach woman activates these early patterns and awakens the ancient desire to conquer and win the inscrutable female figure. Modern psychology confirms Freud's insights. Our brain is programmed to recognize patterns and fill gaps. When you give him only fragmentary information about yourself, his mind will work obsessively to reconstruct the complete picture. This mental activity creates intense preoccupation with you. He constantly thinks about you even when you're not there. Consider history's most famous artworks: the Mona Lisa with her enigmatic smile, Shakespeare's Hamlet with his unresolved mysteries. What makes them timeless? It's not what they show, but what they hide. They leave room for interpretation, for projection, for the viewer's own imagination. When you reveal too much about yourself, you take away his opportunity to discover you. When you communicate too clearly what you think and feel, you rob him of the exciting task of deciphering you. The most beautiful seduction happens not through what is said, but through what remains unspoken. But here lies an important difference. Authentic mysteriousness doesn't arise through conscious manipulation, but through natural emotional depth. When you have a rich inner life, pursue genuine passions, and think complex thoughts, you'll automatically be impossible to completely understand. This natural complexity is what triggers true fascination. Freud taught us, the unconscious thinks in symbols. Your absence becomes a symbol of the unattainable, your restraint a symbol of value, your silence a symbol of depth. In his mind, you don't become a dismissive woman, but a goddess, mysterious, valuable, and desirable precisely because of your unavailability. One of Freud's most disturbing discoveries was repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency of humans to repeatedly relive traumatic or incomplete experiences in the hopeless search for a different resolution. When you properly ignore a man, you activate this primitive mechanism and create a psychological loop from which he cannot free himself. Imagine a man who as a child experienced his mother withdrawing her love when he wasn't well behaved. This early experience burns deep into his unconscious. As an adult, he will unconsciously seek situations that reproduce this early trauma, not because he loves pain, but because his unconscious hopes to write a different ending this time. When you withdraw your attention from him, you activate these deepest layers of his psyche. Suddenly, he's again the little child desperately trying to win the love of the unpredictable mother. The rational, adult man disappears, and the needy child takes control. This child will do anything to win you back, not out of love, but from the compulsive need to heal the old trauma. Freud recognized that this compulsion is stronger than any conscious decision. A man can rationally know that you're not good for him, can resolve to forget you, can tell others he's over you, and still he will keep returning to you. This isn't due to weakness or lack of willpower, but to the powerful forces of his unconscious. Modern neuroscience has confirmed Freud's intuition. Our brain is programmed to complete incomplete actions. This phenomenon is called the Zeigarnik effect. We remember interrupted tasks more intensely than completed ones. When you don't bring a relationship to a clear end, but leave it suspended, you create an open psychic loop in his mind. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever been able to forget someone who left you without explanation, without closure? Probably not. That's because your unconscious works obsessively on this unsolved puzzle, repeatedly asking the same questions, playing through the same scenarios, nurturing the same hopes. But here, the dark side of this psychological power also reveals itself. You're not activating his love, but his neurosis. The man who chases after you does so not from healthy affection, but from compulsive fixation. He doesn't love you. He loves the unfulfilled longing you've triggered in him. Freud warned of the dangers of transference. When we unconsciously project past relationships onto current ones, we don't create real connections, but psychic repetitions of old patterns. A man obsessed with your unavailability may only be repeating his childhood dynamics instead of developing mature, adult love. However, this doesn't mean that strategic ignoring is fundamentally manipulative or harmful. It depends on the intention. If you learn to be properly absent to torture or control a man, you activate destructive patterns. If, however, you set natural boundaries from healthy self-confidence, you can indeed set healing processes in motion. A psychologically healthy man will respond to your authentic unavailability with respect. He'll understand that you have your own life, your own priorities, your own boundaries. An immature or neurotic man, however, will interpret your absence as a challenge he must overcome. The art lies in distinguishing. Do you want a man who pursues you from compulsive fixation, or one who chooses you from free decision and mature affection? The first will always come back, but never for the right reasons. The second may react less dramatically, but his love will be more genuine and lasting. Freud's greatest teaching was that we can only heal what we make conscious. When you understand which psychic mechanisms you activate through your behavior, you can consciously decide what kind of relationship you really want, one based on healthy attraction or one driven by unconscious compulsions. Freud recognized that the human psyche is built like an onion, layer upon layer of consciousness and unconsciousness. True emotional maturity shows itself in how we can draw the boundaries between these layers without damaging ourselves or others. The art of proper ignoring doesn't lie in cold indifference, but in warm yet determined boundaries. Imagine you're a precious painting in a museum. You don't hang there to punish or exclude, but to preserve and display your value. A rope in front of you keeps viewers at a distance, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for your preciousness. That's exactly how healthy emotional boundaries work. They protect not only you, but also the quality of the relationship itself. Freud taught us the concept of the ego ideal, the notion of who we want to be. A man with a healthy ego ideal will respect a woman who has clear boundaries, because these boundaries signal strength and self-respect. A man with a weak ego ideal, however, will feel your boundaries as an insult and try to break through them. The most important insight: true emotional distance doesn't arise through calculation, but through authenticity. When you lead a fulfilling life with your own dreams, friendships, passions, and goals, then your unavailability isn't a strategy, but a natural consequence of your lifestyle. You don't consciously ignore him, you're simply too busy with your own valuable life. Think about the most successful women you know. Are they successful because they manipulate men? Or are they attractive because they lead such rich, interesting lives that men can only get a small part of their attention? The answer is obvious. Authentic unavailability is more magnetic than any conscious strategy. Freud also discovered the principle of sublimation, the transformation of primitive drives into higher cultural activities. When you learn to transform your longing for validation through a man into the development of your own talents and interests, you create a natural, attractive distance. You no longer need him for completion, you're already complete. But how do you set boundaries without hurting? The answer lies in the type of communication. Instead of saying, "I don't want to see you," you can say, "I already have plans." Instead of thinking, "You annoy me," you can think, "I need time for myself." And the difference lies not only in the words, but in the underlying attitude, respect, instead of rejection. Freud taught us that the unconscious knows no negations. When you think inwardly, "I don't want to hurt him," your unconscious focuses on the word hurt. Think instead, "I want a healthy, respectful connection." Your subconscious will act accordingly. The greatest danger in setting boundaries is confusing hardness with clarity. Hardness arises from hurt and anger. Clarity arises from self-love and wisdom. A man senses the difference intuitively. Hardness will either scare him away or activate his conquest instincts. Clarity, however, will help him understand that you're valuable, not because you're hard to reach, but because you value yourself. Consider successful business relationships. The best partners aren't those who are always available, but those who have clear times of availability and unavailability. They respect themselves enough to set boundaries, and they respect others enough to communicate these boundaries kindly but firmly. The same principle works in romantic relationships. A man who truly values you won't see your boundaries as obstacles, but as signs of your self-worth. He'll understand that a woman who respects herself will also respect him. A woman without boundaries, however, unconsciously signals that she has little value, or that she hasn't learned to recognize and protect her own worth. After everything we've learned about the psychology of ignoring, we must face the uncomfortable truth that Freud explored throughout his life. True love and neurotic obsession are two completely different phenomena, even though they may seem similar on the surface. The deepest insight is that authentic attraction isn't created through tricks, but through developing into a person who is naturally desirable. Freud distinguished between infatuation, a temporary psychic transference of one's own ideals onto another person, and mature love, which is based on real recognition and appreciation of the other. When you conquer a man through strategic ignoring, what kind of bond are you really creating? Imagine two scenarios. In the first, he chases after you because you've activated his unconscious patterns, triggered his childhood traumas, awakened his neurotic fixations. He loves you, but actually he loves the chase, the challenge, the hope of conquest. In the second scenario, he chooses you consciously because he appreciates your qualities, respects your authenticity, truly knows and loves your personality. Which love would you prefer? Freud warned that we often get what we unconsciously seek. If you're looking for validation through male attention, you'll attract men who can give you that validation, but possibly for the wrong reasons. If, however, you're looking for genuine partnership, you must become a genuine partner yourself. The paradoxical truth is, the most effective way to attract a man isn't to ignore him, but to become so interesting that you're naturally hard to reach. When you pursue a passion that fulfills you, you'll automatically become less needy. When you maintain friendships that nourish you, you'll automatically become less dependent on his attention. When you have goals that excite you, you'll automatically be less available. Consider the people you admire most, not because they're hard to reach, but because they're so completely absorbed in their own lives that their energy becomes magnetic. These people don't need to learn how to ignore. They're naturally selective with their attention because they have so many valuable things in their lives. Freud discovered that our deepest desire isn't the fulfillment of all longings, but the development into our authentic self. A woman who has learned to love herself doesn't need strategies. Her self-love radiates a natural authority that is respected. Her satisfaction with herself makes her independent of external validation. Her inner fullness makes her generous in love, but never needy. The most important distinction lies between temporary attraction and lasting connection. Strategies can create attention, but only authenticity can nourish real love. A man may initially be fascinated by your mysterious behavior, but in the long run, he'll stay because he values you as a person, your values, your dreams, your way of thinking and feeling. Freud also taught us that true healing doesn't happen through repeating old patterns, but through consciously breaking them. If you learn to properly ignore men to attract them, you may be perpetuating unhealthy dynamics. If, however, you learn to love and develop yourself so that you become naturally attractive, you break these patterns and create space for genuine, mature love. The highest form of attraction doesn't arise from what you hide, but from what you are. Not from what you withhold, but from what you have to give. Not from your unavailability, but from your value as a complete, authentic person. The true art lies in leading a life so fulfilling that a man would consider himself lucky to be part of it, not as the center of your universe, but as a valued addition to an already complete life. That's the deeper truth Freud teaches us. Real attraction doesn't arise from manipulating others, but from the complete development of one's own self. Today, you've taken a journey through the hidden mechanisms of human attraction. You've understood how scarcity creates value, how absence nourishes longing, and how unconscious projections can work more powerfully than any conscious communication. But the most important insight is this: true power doesn't lie in manipulating others, but in becoming so authentic and complete that your natural magnetism becomes irresistible. Freud showed us that the deepest truths about ourselves often lie hidden. Perhaps the hidden truth within you isn't the ability to ignore men, but the ability to love yourself so much that you no longer need strategies. What hidden truth within you could change your life if you recognized and lived it? Drop a comment about which country you're watching from. It's fascinating to see how universal these psychological truths really are.